first off, like, how real is the competition?
Oh, it's very real.
Like, is it ego, like, in the room?
And people came up to my table and were legit fucking pissed off that I wasn't doing fried chicken and biscuits. Oh man, you know, we bought these tickets and, you know, we thought you were gonna be doing fucking
Play the
fried
fucking
chicken.
hits.
Okay, if you're gonna go see Led Zeppelin in concert and you spend $800 tickets, are you going just to hear Stairway to Heaven? Or don't you wanna listen to their entire...
I mean, yeah, but I want to hear Stairway to Heaven too. Chris, thank you so much for coming. My God, man, what haven't you done? You're a Top Chef finalist.
Yes.
Beat Bobby Flay judge and contestant, or just a judge?
Contestant, yes. I was actually on the show one time, been back twice for his holiday special.
Oh, okay.
You know, that's kind of where he invites his friends, you know, to where yes, you are competing, but it's more or less, you know, oh, we're just going to bullshit and have some fun, which in my opinion is more fun than actually competing on the show. But right now, I've been a resident judge there for about 2 seasons.
My God, man, this is the biggest celebrity we've ever. So, but let's just like wind back a little bit and just what's been your experience in New York's food scene?
Well, you know, my wife and I, we opened up Butterfunk, you know, and before that it was a Brooklyn commune.
Yeah.
And
well, talk about Butterfunk though.
Yeah.
Because like what it is now, I don't think is necessarily what it was.
Certainly not.
So
yeah.
what was it?
Butterfunk, I was talking to somebody about it, and they were asking like, yo, man, you know, we really miss Butterfunk, you know, in Brooklyn. And I tell them that Butterfunk was really more than a location. Butterfunk is a vibe, you know.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm involved in that Butterfunk vibe, you're really gonna feel its core and the integrity that it promoted.
Well, when did you open the original? What was it?
We opened that up in 2013.
Where at?
In Windsor Terrace.
Yeah.
Right off of Prospect Park South.
So what was it like in New York's restaurant scene then? And what were you trying to build?
In Brooklyn, that's when Lafayette Street was jumping off, you know. I think that's Lafayette Street, down there by the Barclays.
There's Flatbush,
Lafayette.
Atlantic. The Lafayette's down there, I believe.
Yeah. So like all the you know, up and coming spots was jumping off there. On Prospect Park West, you had Krupa Grocery and, you know, all these places that were coming up on the scene. Manhattan, I mean, we didn't really get into Manhattan that often back then. I mean, as a restaurant owner, you know that once your place is open, you're pretty much tied from the hands, the heat. I mean, the hands, the feet, the waist, you know, like you barely even leave your spot at all because you're just there all the time.
But you just opened it with your wife, right?
Yeah.
What was the menu?
The menu was about maybe 20 pieces, you know, and, you know, it was great. There was a lot of real, authentic Southern food pieces on there. Like there were a neck bone dish, there was oxtails. I mean, of course, there were your celebration foods, you know, your ribs, your fried chicken and biscuits, but a lot of it was real deal, authentic Southern cuisine, you know. A lot of seafood-focused dishes, a lot of vegetable
Like it was crazy
stews.
popular, right?
It was crazy popular, you know, because everybody in the beginning just thought, okay, here's another fake Southern place that's gonna, you know, be up there with like pies and thighs and, you know what I mean? Like people just started comparing me to quote unquote Southern places that aren't even within our realm of stuff, because, you know, not just the food that's telling the story, but it's you know, what's going on inside that room that tells the story. You walk in and you're transported back to your grandmother's place, you know, just from the images on the wall or the music that's coming from the spot. Like we created a natural vibe, you know.
Well, this is one thing I don't like that is personally interesting to me, and it's not interesting in like a hey, this is fun, but like how can you have a place be so successful and not make it?
Right. Well, New York City is, you know, treacherous. You know, like you and I were just talking, besides having to pay your staff, besides having to pay your property tax, besides having to pay your quarterly tax, whatever it is that you take in yourself, your rent, you barely have enough to make it. Any New York City restaurateur can tell you that story, unless you have some big time investor, that's writing $500,000 checks your way to cover payroll or whatever. It's literally, you are struggling to make ends meet.
So what happened at the end? I don't want to take you through a hard, like a difficult, but like what happened? I mean, because, it's like this kind of happens to me a lot.
Yeah.
Which is like my favorite absolute place that I'll go to is, usually, a place that maybe it's not a huge build out or something like that, but they have excellent food and it's really consistent and the service is always good. And like that's really what the focus is, and I think that's the most important thing to focus. But it seems like those places always close, and I'm heartbroken about it. And it's usually like rent. To be honest, it's just rent. It's restaurateur goes into a place that's like kind of out of the way or isn't really popular or at the time. Restaurant comes in, brings the popularity, brings the people, makes it become a hot spot, and all of a sudden the landlord is like, oh well, now you can afford X because of this, and it's like, motherfucker, I'm the one that brought it. Like, is that something that happened, or is this as common as I think?
It's very common. I mean, our place. So our story. Once we got into the space, when we had Brooklyn Commune, that was our first restaurant. And we were paying about $7,000 per month, rent there. And the landlord at the time asked if we wanted to expand next door. So we took over the space next door, which became Butterfunk. Basically, what we did is that we busted a hole through the kitchen, and the kitchen, that one kitchen outfitted both spots. So from the street, it looked like two spots.
But it was connected by a communal kitchen.
It was connected by one kitchen.
That's pretty smart.
So for breakfast and lunch, it was the one spot. Mm-hmm. We had a hard shutdown at 4:30. By 5:30, Butterfunk came to life, and that was crazy busy. I mean, we had lines out the door. I'll show you pictures of places of the line out the door in December. So people would come while it's freezing cold and would wait, in line, because we didn't take any reservations, because our place, we sat 70 seats or so. So if you were not in line for that first clip, then you had to wait about an hour or so for the next seating, and the lines were out the door,
Are you nostalgic for it?
Every now and then, my wife and I, we think back about what we did, as a community restaurant in that space, because we weren't just that place that was taking money, and going on, extravagant trips and shit, like we, every piece of money that came to us, we gave back, either through community gardens or, block parties or different things that we did. But anyway, our landlord sold the building. Now, there were 3 storefronts in the building. There were 9 units upstairs that people lived at, Some were rent stabilized, a lot weren't. We lived upstairs. Esperanza Spalding, the jazz musician, she lives right next door, which was kind of cool, And so there were 3 storefronts, 9 units upstairs. She sold that whole thing for $5 million, cheap in Brooklyn, right? Sold it to a company that took over. We find out, through the mail about a week or so later, like, hey, we're your new landlords. Whatever lease you had before is now done. This is what you're going to sign, So you're sort of forced to either be like, fuck that, I'm leaving, but we were already there for almost a good 7 years, Like, we were part of that neighborhood, part of the community, obviously very busy, doing everything well, able to make ends meet because we were able to afford that rent, still have a good payroll, still pay the property tax, do all these things. They said, okay, your new lease is going to be up to $15,000 a month, and we're like, dude, that can't happen. That's...
Like,
that's not going to happen. He goes, well, you've been on TV. We've done our homework. We see lines around the door, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, but how much stuff do I have to sell in order to make that rent? I still have labor. I still have all this stuff. There's no way I'm paying $15,000 a month. Let's come to terms. Let's talk about it. They didn't want to talk. Summertime came. Let's talk about it. Didn't come. Thanksgiving came. Dude, we need to talk about this lease. If they weren't going to come to us talking about any type of terms, on New Year's Eve would have been our last night. So on New Year's Eve,
that was it?
2019, that was our last night.
Damn.
And we left, and we filed for bankruptcy, you know, and we bounced, and we went up to Connecticut, and we opened up a spot where the rent up there was $3,000 a month, and we opened up a spot up there.
Man.
Mm-hmm.
How mad were you?
I mean, it's...
Like,
the anger part kind of came later because, like, you know me. I mean, everything about me is work related. Like, everything is work right there in your face. You know, like, I need to be focused on what's next, what the next move is. I can't worry about emotions and get all caught up in that shit. Like, I got family, I got, you know, mouths to feed, I got stuff to do. I have my own artistic outlet to think about, you know? So rather than thinking about it like in an emotional standpoint, I just thought about, okay, you're fucking me over. Here's what I got to do. What's next? Okay, it's Connecticut. Let's make that move. You know, so it wasn't until like a little bit after that I was able to really absorb all of it. And it got to, and especially with what happened in Connecticut as well, which is a whole different story. But like it almost made me not want to cook anymore. And for that to occur to someone like me is pretty huge, you know, because cooking, I say it all the time, cooking is where I lose myself and find myself all over again. Like, I look at it more from an artistic point of view. Yeah, it's what I do, it's work and everything, but my outlet with it is so much a part of who I am.
But
you know,
I want to also, it's weird because your story is so rich. But I do want to see if we could talk a little bit about, you know, what the industry or trying to kind of like carve out your space in this industry. It takes a lot.
Yeah.
It costs a lot. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about like personally, it costs a lot. So, you know, people that are eager to jump into the restaurant industry, kind of maybe they have rose colored glasses on it. Like, kind of like, give us a dose, man. Like, what's it really like? How much time does it really take? How much of your attention does it really take to do it? Cause like
all of it, because you are mentally, physically, financially connected to it all the way around. And there are moments where you cannot pull yourself away from that because you feel like you have to, you know, especially if you don't have investors, especially if you don't have partners, if it's just you know, and like some family members or whatever, like your entire life savings depends on this. Your children, you, the roof over your head, like everything fucking depends on this. Like I don't have a dude writing checks for me to bail me out. You know, like this is very much a part of it. I missed my mother's funeral because of work. You know, I had children of mine in their younger days that were sitting in the corner doing their homework because we couldn't afford childcare. That later on in life, you know, you're hearing it from them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are so many parts of it that are just not so pretty. You know what I mean? Like, and back then I was drinking, you know, and that was a problem, you know, and you drank just to kind of, you know, numb all the pain that was happening, which is another thing that runs like crazy in the industry, but it, once it has its hooks in you, it really does. Like I showed you that documentary that my daughter made, you know, she was one of the
well, tell me the opening line to this documentary.
Yeah. And it says the restaurant takes what it wants and there's nothing that you can do about it. And that's so true. And she wrote that at 17 years old. So she knew just from being in the room what I was going through, what my wife was going through, our financial hooks, our mental, our physical constraint. Like, I mean, there were days when I would have off or whatever where you're just so mentally, physically exhausted that all you do is sleep.
Yeah.
You know, because it's that one moment where you can just kind of deflate, you know, but on your days off, you're down there going through the paperwork, you're doing deep cleaning, you're, you know, like you're never not there.
Yeah.
Never not there. My wife and I used to take trips back home to Philly, you know, just to kind of get away before the restaurant. And then we opened the spot. Yeah. And then we opened the restaurant, and I remember it was Christmas break. And we went down to Philly to see my cousin, and my wife and I slept through the whole thing. You know, usually we would go down, celebrate Christmas together, hang out, eat, cook, do whatever. We went down there, and we're literally in bed probably for about 3 days, got up to take a piss, and that's it.
And just slept?
And slept, you know. Like, you're just emotionally, physically, spiritually spent. And imagine doing that for 10 years. You know,
like, is it worth it?
For some, for me, you know,
was.
Yeah, I mean, but it holds a different part of me. There are parts of it. There's a lot of it that I regret. I regret having my children, you know, sit in the corner when we couldn't afford the child care. You know, and just them sitting there, you know, from like breakfast till dinner, you know. I regret, you know, drinking and, you know, and having that not only destroy me and what that was doing to me physically, but emotionally to my family. You know, there are a lot of regrets about it, but like I was talking about, the artistic approach to it, you know, and sort of what it means to the culture, you know, because there aren't that many people that look like me during that time.
Yeah.
You know, so I felt a certain responsibility to continue to do well and to succeed and to even better myself, to become sober. Yeah. To become a role model, to do all these things outside of the ugliness of what I was going through, but I mean, but that itself is a story. Yeah. You know?
So Butterfunk ends, and then you move to Connecticut. Mm-hmm. That doesn't go great. How do you come back to New York? Like, it's hard to come back to New York, or was it? Yeah. And like, when did the kind of like celebrity chef thing kind of take off for you too? Like, what was the first time that you did anything like that?
I mean, back in Philadelphia, I was always doing some TV stuff, but that was, you know, during the holidays, or, you know, it's Easter and you're doing shit for PBS or somebody like that. Easter time is Chris Scott and he's doing like Easter pie or whatever, you know. So, but like that, I guess that was my first taste of TV or, you know, anything like that. But I was on Chopped, you know, back, I guess, in 2012, 2013. And then everything as far as like major TV stuff sort of started around that time.
What was Top Chef like?
Great. Top Chef was really, really awesome. I mean, because in my opinion, and I think in a lot of chefs' opinion, during that time, that was a reputable TV show because it was me battling you at your best. Yeah. You know, like you didn't have... You know, like you weren't riding around on a tricycle using Fisher-Price knives with a papoose with a chimpanzee in it, you know, while trying to make this best dish in 20 minutes. Yeah. You know, which a lot of the TV competition world is kind of all about, you know. But this was me versus you at your best.
And Top Chef, it really... I mean, I haven't watched it in a little while, but it really was the epitome of like a cooking show. I always, it was kind of like, it was like the adult in the room. Right. Like I remember watching an episode of Chopped where they had to use like menthol flavored cough drops in an app. And I was like, what the fuck? Get out of here with that.
Exactly. That's not cooking.
How like, first off, like, how real is the competition?
Oh, it's very real.
Like, is it ego, like, in the room, or?
Some. I mean, I think that our season lucked out. I said it before, is that whoever was in charge of putting our season together deserved a Nobel Peace Prize.
Really?
Because we're still very much in contact with each other, some more so than not. But there was really no beef, during my season. There were a few, but
Season 15, right?
Yeah.
It's in Colorado.
Correct.
Yeah.
But they were eliminated early on, But a lot of us are still in touch with each other, and it wasn't like a lot of hate being thrown around. The producers were always in your ear. Like, yo, Nate took your plastic wrap. So what are you going to do? Oh, Nate stole your knife. So what are you going to do? Like, no, he didn't. Get the fuck out of here.
Right. But and on Top Chef, is that where this biscuit became like legendary?
Yeah.
And like, it's weird to say that a dish could actually become, but it did. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that, because like, I know that. I mean, you've talked a lot about this biscuit, but it really is something that I think, like, changed the trajectory a little bit. And can you tell me about it? Like, what was the dish that you served on Top Chef where it became kind of like a thing?
Right. So during that season, I was already doing pretty well. I went on there kind of doing a lot of food from my background, which I gave it the name Amish soul food. Which isn't really a thing, but where I'm from, it's a lot of German, Dutch, and the Amish. Mm-hmm. And when my ancestors moved up from Virginia, with a lot of their Southern influence, a lot of that food sort of intermingled. So I grew up on this food. When I was on the show, this is the food that I was doing. And if you watch the first, I guess, 4 weeks of the show, I'm doing pretty good. Like I'm up in the top 3, I'm winning a few, I'm doing it. And then it got to this part where we needed to do an episode on the heritage of a dish or of the chef. And I did fried chicken, biscuits, collard greens with like a Scotch bonnet hot sauce. And that won. But I think that more so than whatever food it was, because Joe Sasto came in second, and I think Tanya came in third, and she did like a gumbo dish, and Joe did, like some chicken dish with like prunes or whatever. No one really talks about those dishes, but those dishes were also fantastic. I think that what made mine popular, not just popular with the judges that were at the table, but that national acclaim that I got that still exists, is that people are more attracted to foods that are comforting, foods that they know about, foods that kind of transport you back to a special moment or time in your life. And despite wherever you come from, I mean, I'm sure in your family, and we're very different, that fried chicken and biscuits existed in your world
100%
as well.
Chicken fried steak was like
right.
But I mean, it's not, I'm not saying it's exact, but like, yeah, right. of course.
Mm-hmm. So when you have someone winning that on Top Chef, wow, that must be really intense and delicious. I want to know more.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really where its popularity kind of stemmed from. Here's a dish that I know that I can relate to, that touches all forms of people here in this country, regardless of your background, but because it's done on Top Chef, I want to know more about that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think it could be even simpler though, which is like, you have the, I don't say background, but you're the guy to make that dish. It's in your DNA. It's like
so every.
Well, I'm not saying that I couldn't.
Yeah.
Of course I could.
Yeah.
Like, of course I could. I could follow I could make whatever. I'm not saying that I can't.
Yeah.
But it's not of me.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense to you. Mm-hmm. So like, I could make an imitation of a dish that you would do or that somebody else would do, but it is a replica. it is not the same necessarily. And like, you know, the question around authenticity is so weird because like, who gives a shit if it's delicious, right? But there's this magic that happens when you take something like you said that everybody kind of is familiar with. You elevate the execution of that to up here. And then you kind of understand that the reason that this dish is up here is because every facet of the person that made its life kind of like is emblematic of the final product. So you can talk about, you know, your family recipe for this biscuit, and like you're like, well, it's not the exact same, but it's been there, and this is my hands now. Like again, like I don't have that kind of like history with the dish. Again, I could make it excellent, and if it was just a blind taste test, would you? Maybe, I don't know if you'd be able to tell. Of course you would. But when you kind of like marry that with the person behind it, and that's where I feel like true authenticity comes from, because you're like, well, Almost Southern doesn't really exist. It's not really a thing. It's like, fuck yeah, it is. It's through you. Like, you're the thing. Does that make so like?
It does.
So it's like when you put a dish like that out there, it's not somebody trying to make the best representation of what they think would be this dish. You're like, no, this is like of my experience, which I think really brings it all together. I don't mean to like wax poetic on this or whatever, but like, man, that's just such a nice thing to be able to hear someone say, like, I created food that's from my background that I know so well, and then have it get kind of recognized in that way.
See, but I think a lot of us do that. I mean, of course, there are chefs who just cook, you know, and then there are chefs who create, and then there are chefs, you know, I mean, there's so many levels of us. Like I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day. There are chefs that I would consider artists. I'm one of them. My business partner is another one. The way that he approaches food, his palate is intense, but also his approach to it. Then you have workhorses. You know, then there are, you know, like there's a guy who can prep an event for 2,000 by himself. You know, and then there. So although we're all chefs and we all talk to each other as chefs, there are different levels of us. You know, but I think in the end, we're all cooking that lineage, that story. You know, we're all cooking what it is that we know that makes it wonderful and delicious and unique.
I just got to give you props, man, because, you know, I've eaten a lot of awesome dishes for Best Dish Ever, but that biscuit that you gave me when I came to Butterfunk that first time, I mean, it was like, it was literally just like stopping for a second and just remembering something from my childhood that I had forgotten. And it was a very comforting memory for me. And it's just like, dude, it was just amazing. So it's like really cool to see like that you've been able to kind of like build, like that it's getting the recognition that it is, and that you've built so much off of that. Do you ever get tired of it?
I mean, for the longest, it was hard to be able to embrace it. You know,
why is that?
I think because a lot of people will pigeonhole you. You know, like, okay, you're obviously black, you're obviously doing soul food. Anything outside of that, you know, doesn't make sense to us. You know, I think that for the longest that was my story. You know, I remember doing pop-ups or whatever after Top Chef. Now, if you watched my season of Top Chef, I only did Southern food one time. You know what I mean?
But it's
right. The rest of it is like me cooking what it is that I do. And we did one event, and this had to be like back in 2018 or whatever, right after the show was aired. And I'm doing this event, and it was packed, and had to be like 500 something people coming to the event. And a lot of people were coming because there were people in the room that were from the show, including me. And people came up to my table and were legit fucking pissed off that I wasn't doing fried chicken and biscuits. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like, oh man, you know, we bought these tickets, and you know, we thought you were gonna be doing fucking
play
fried
the fucking
chicken.
hits.
Yeah, like, dude, like, okay, if you're gonna go see Led Zeppelin in concert and you spend $800 tickets, are you going just to hear Stairway to Heaven? Or don't you want to listen to their entire?
I mean, yeah, but I want to hear Stairway to Heaven too.
Well, that's
I understand.
will probably be
I
there.
understand.
You know
I
what
understand.
I mean?
Yeah.
So for the longest, I was like fighting that, you know, and then it made me, you know, like sort of resent it, You know, like why now do I have to be that black dude who just makes fried chicken and biscuits? Why can't I just be the guy, the black dude that just cooks? Or why can't I just be the dude that cooks? You know, that just happens to have that in my repertoire.
Yeah.
You know, and it's good just as this dish is good, and that dish is good, and that dish is good. You know, like, why is it that I only need to be known for that and pigeonholed for that? You know, and that bled into a lot of things with a lot of people that were investing into it, you know, in Connecticut and in different places. And I guess with them, they were unable to embrace what I was going through, or because they probably, you know, took interest because they saw Chris during the real Butterfunk time, you know, when I was happy and, you know, going out and embracing the world and the world embracing me before Chicken and Biscuits was even part of a thing.
Yeah.
You know, when I was out there doing it. And then Chicken and Biscuits came, and then, you know, and then more so once people were like, no, you are known just for this and you need to stay doing just this dish. You're like, well, I'm more than that, you know?
Yeah.
And it took a while and many conversations with colleagues and friends in the industry and, you know, folks from all walks of life to be able to embrace it. You know, a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, he goes, you can't be mad because your chicken and biscuits are delicious. You know, just remember that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, all right, you know, it would be one thing if your chicken and biscuits sucked, because then they would be like, all right, yeah, you're right. The fucking shit sucks. We're going over here.
Yeah.
You know, but because it's delicious and you're making it delicious, you know, they keep coming. You know, and it took that in my mind. It took me starting to like take a deep dive into black bakers and to the lineage of people with brown hands that were making these dishes and why they were doing it. So it took more so than me just doing it the way that I was even then on Top Chef. Like, yeah, it was a part of me. I knew how to do it. There was, you know, a history and a story behind it. And I was able to replicate what my grandparents did on the show. It was delicious, yes. But I never really thought about the why of it. And I guess it was during the struggle of being pigeonholed into, you're just that guy who makes that and that only, you know,
Yeah.
that I was able to sit in that shit, sit in that funk, you know, and rather than like try to lift myself out, I sat there in it and kind of like started going through it in my head, like, all right, so why is it that it's popular? Why is it that I'm being, you know, made to feel this way? Like all of it. And then I was able to kind of climb out of it and embrace it and kind of walk it in a different direction. You know, I'm still doing chicken and biscuits. I still embrace it. I still love it, you know, but I'm also able to do other things and celebrate these other things within the culture as well, while still being known for biscuits, more so biscuits than chicken, but they kind of go hand in hand.
I mean, that lemonade fried chicken is like easily as good as the biscuits. That's like, I get is anybody
Right.
that's listening, it's just like, you know, there's like food, and then there's like
Right.
something. It's just when you have it, it's just something more.
And there's also so much of a stigma back then too that I mean, there are black people that still won't eat fried chicken in public. To this day, as we are speaking right now, there are black folk that won't eat fried chicken in public, won't eat watermelon in public because of all the stigma that goes around that, and they know that they're being fucked with, you know. So there was that as well. Like, dude, before the show even came out, I had 30 years cooking,
Yeah.
you know, based in a lot of European background and had the experience to learn other cultures, you know, and kind of add that to my repertoire as well. But when the chicken and biscuit thing came out, none of that was important, you know,
Yeah.
to the masses.
Well, this
of
is also
people.
kind of when like Sean Brock was a big thing.
And
Right.
Sean Brock is, I think, a lot of people give Sean Brock heat, and I'll throw some shade, that way as well. But Sean is from Virginia. Sean has Appalachian background, so he's very much entitled to the food that he's doing. But the food that he's doing is the food that I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just as much as he's entitled to it, so am I.
Yeah.
But why isn't he catching the heat? You know what I mean? Sean Brock will take trips to Africa and learn different things about rice culture. Come back to Virginia or Knoxville or wherever the fuck he's cooking, and then take these African influenced dishes, put it on his menu, and be deemed a genius, while he's not giving props to the Africans who inspired him to do such dishes. Where if I do it, it's a gimmick, it's niche. I need to stay in my lane. Sean gets a pass. You know what I mean? I think that because he's entitled to do the food, why not me? Why not, Gregory, down in Charlotte? Why not Adrian? Why not all these, as a million chefs?
Do you think it's more just that it's, there's so much of this in culture today, from the WNBA to cooking, where it's like, who gets all the accolades and why? And I don't know. I've never met him. I have no idea. I have no idea. He seems very genuine, but if he was a black guy doing it, would he have gotten as much attention as being a white guy did? I don't know. But if his food wasn't good, I don't think he would get any attention.
Correct. That's the
same
thing that
right?
my friend told me. You can't be mad that the chicken and biscuits taste good. I mean, Sean, like I said, he's entitled to do what he wants to do. He comes from that background. That's his heritage as well. There are chefs that throw shade on him even harder. My only gripe with him is that if you're going to Africa to get inspired, show love to the Africans. Do your dish. I'm not saying don't do it,
right?
But just be like, hey, you know what? This rice dish that I created, I didn't really create it. I did it. I was inspired by my trips to Ghana, to Nigeria, to this, and learning rice culture from that. I just don't know why he doesn't say that.
Yeah, there was a story. I don't have my laptop in front of me, so I might butcher it. But there was a story about two kids. I think there were two women, went down to Mexico to learn how to make tortillas and learn how to really make authentic Mexican food. And they went back to Portland and they opened up a little spot, and they were forced to close down because they were accused of appropriating Mexican culture for making that food. And people got real heated on both sides, right? It's like, who the fuck are you to tell somebody they can't make something? Right. And then the other side is like, well, they didn't act, they just went down and learned a bunch of secrets from these people, and then they're coming up and taking advantage of that.
Right.
And as I've kind of put this series together and I look at some of the dishes that we really have focused on, I think so much of it comes down to how you kind of put your experience or your take on a dish. So instead of saying I am making the most authentic Mexican tacos, whatever, it's kind of like I went down there to learn exactly what that is, and then here's my kind of take on that. So it's not that, it is this. And that's one of the dishes that you chose for your episode of Best Dish Ever was the chopped cheese rice cake from No One. And that's a dish that could only exist here. This is a Korean American guy. He doesn't make, he's not born in Harlem with generations there to create the chopped cheese. No, but he kind of took his lived experience and kind of made something completely different. I don't know who has license to make what or why, but I think the big denominating factor is is it really good? And is it respectful? And,
see, but the thing about Jay doing that chopped cheese dish is that he'll show love to the inspiration.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? My only, again, with these women that went down to Mexico to learn tortillas, cool, do that. Travel, experience life, learn, do it all. Believe me, if I could go to Japan, my best lived culinary dream would be to go to Japan and live there for a year just butchering fish.
Oh, yeah.
Then move to Africa and the Middle East and learn spices and rice culture, then maybe live in the Middle East, and do something there, and then come back home and really do me through this lived experience. But I would most certainly talk about where I've been, who inspired me by name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
Where like if I walk out of here today and I want to do a dish inspired by your pizza, you'd be the first, name coming out of my mouth.
Might appreciate that.
You know what I mean? Like, here's a dish, but it comes from me spending 2 weeks hanging out with Nate. I'm in his pizza room. I'm learning about his dough technique. I'm doing this, that, and that inspired me to make bang.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people would look at that like, oh, wow, that's cool, and would probably put more of the shine on me. But I'm also inviting you to that conversation and letting them know that this dish would not exist if it didn't come from Nate being here and being in the room and being around me in conversations with him and all of that. You know what I mean? Like, that is where I think a lot of the beef comes. Like, these people that wanted this woman's tortilla shop to be shut down. That's crazy. But at the same time,
they closed. They really they closed down. That was
right,
and that's tough for me.
Yeah, that's hard, but I don't know. I mean, unless they were just like, yo, this is my recipe, and I don't know anything about. I never took a trip to Mexico.
What are you talking about? I dreamt this up.
I don't know, but it's so easy to just talk about our influences.
Yeah.
And show love where it's due.
Yeah.
The thing is that if you don't show love and pull up people and individuals, then you're putting a cap on your legacy. The important part is to be able to lift folks up and allow them to shine. If I have this platform where I can make a dish, inspired by your pizza, but I'm allowing this dish that I created for you to be almost half of that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I'm allowing some of this shine to also shine on you because I don't deserve all of it.
I know, man, I got a big ego, and I'm like, oh, man, you better leave my shit alone. No, I'm just kidding. I spent 10 years on that shit, motherfucker. You're going to do it in 2 weeks?
But there are a lot of people. I think ego gets in the way
100%
of folks unable to pull people up. But then, in the end, when you look at that, it's like, how much fruit is your tree bearing now?
I agree. It's funny because I get into these conversations a lot recently, which is like, what's the end of what are you doing? Your pursuit, right? And it's like every time I find myself being like selfless and generous, I'm being generous with my time, generous with my ideas, generous with my critique or whatever it is, things always go great. And like things kind of seem to work out.
Right.
Every time I get like protective and small and like narrow-minded, nothing ever, it's not that it doesn't work out, it's just, it's a lot more difficult. Yeah. And I just think that like, especially with food, it's so weird. It's so competitive. The food industry is crazy competitive. And if it's not you, it's someone else. And if it's not them, it's someone else. And there's so many people that are trying to kind of like make their way. Yep. So like, how do you do it? How do you kind of like, do you have sharp elbows and you got to kind of like, stay in your lane, man?
I think it's more long game, because if you look at those who are really doing it, who don't even look like they even care about the competition anymore. Look at Marcus.
Marcus Samuelson.
Yeah, he's been doing it for a long time. And I can share pictures of you with you of me and him when we were young. Back when I was one of his sous chefs, and coming up in the industry, and back when he came down to Philly and was opened up a place with Steven Starr. At Washington Square and everything, and just how competitive it was in his particular world because of who he was as a black chef, trying to make room, not just for him, but for others, but for him primarily because he was the first. He was the one that was trying to elbow through. I mean, of course, there were ones before him, Patrick Clark, Govan Armstrong, on and on and on. But if you look at Marcus now and everything that he's done, it doesn't even look like he's trying to compete anymore. He's smooth sailing. I'm sure that it's probably very different from his point of view.
Oh, 100%.
You know what I mean? But you look at long game chefs, Daniel Boulou, Alice Waters, Nancy Silverton, Scott Conant. You know what I mean? Like these dudes, these players are, backstroking now. You know what I mean? Like, but they did it because you do all that rah-rah shit in the beginning, to where it's all about you and not necessarily about the food. I call that part of the career, the Hollywood syndrome, to where you have chefs like, I had a buddy of mine the other day, he said that he was hiring a chef. And he said, I want you to come through and do 3 dishes for me. This motherfucker came through and did 10. He didn't get the job, because even though he did 3 dishes very good, because he put 10 on the table, he opened himself up
to critique on
all 10,
yeah.
And the reasons why he put all 10 out, But when you're young, you're all about like, yo, I'm gonna fucking you're asking for 3, but I'm gonna give you 10. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. Yo, check out my foam. Yo, I took a tomato and turned it into a jelly and a foam. Like, bro, that tomato's so beautiful and picked just right. All you really needed to do was slice it, extra virgin, a little salt, and bang, and it's perfect. Like, you transforming that into something that it doesn't really need to be is more about you than the product. But for these long game chefs, they grew out of that, and it became more about the history, theirs, and the food. It became more about the food, more became about the way that it came, the way about ingredients are used or come up. You're like, the more silent that these guys became, the more prominent they became.
Understandable.
Do you know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean.
And that's how, when you say it's competitive only in the beginning of the race. It's just like watching a marathon here when everyone's lined up at the starting line in Staten Island, and how you really got to battle your way through. But after like mile 10, you're starting to see who's really striding.
How many people, if you had 100 chefs starting, how many achieve the long game? How many get there?
20, 15.
Maybe.
Maybe.
And
in different aspects too, like, because it doesn't really rely on just the cooking part of it. Like, maybe you might go into teaching, maybe you might go into media, maybe you might start doing documentaries. You look at a lot of people, maybe like my dear friend, and I love him to death, Alexander Smalls, one of the pioneers, like a really genuinely great guy. Started out as a chef, Now he's still involved in the food world, but Brother Man has time to sing, and not just sing, but do well.
Yeah.
Brother Man has an opera. He's an opera singer now. You know what I mean? And coming out with albums and writing books, and still very deeply rooted in what's happening in the world of food, but now doing it from the offensive coordinator's booth, and where he can point and say like, yo, you do this, you do that, you can come up a little bit, you can move to the left.
It's so funny, man.
You know what I mean?
You talk to enough people in different areas of the restaurant industry and you notice themes. And I've been really fortunate. I get to talk to some really cool people. And like what you just explained is exactly how Danny Meyer explained his role at 11 Madison Park and then growing out Shake Shack. So what he said was, when he started out with Union Square, he thought he was going to be the guy, the cook, and he thought he was going to do all of this stuff. He loved wine, he loved cooking, and he realized he was a fucking disaster. Like, he was the hang-up for why this restaurant wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so once he kind of like removed himself from the actual operation and like acted more as a conductor of an orchestra rather than as a player of an instrument, he was able to really sit back and kind of like start putting things together, which, really played, I guess, on his strength. But it's funny because it's just such a common theme, which is finding out like where your best role is and how you fit in, and then more importantly, can you figure out the other elements of people, of dishes or whatever that need to be in place to make it hum, to make it really sing.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the state of New York's dining scene now?
One of my new favorite restaurants, it's called Theodora. It's in Fort Greene. Yo, it is jumping off. So good.
What kind of cuisine?
The chef, I believe he's Middle Eastern or Israeli, you know, but a lot of his food, they have a bread menu. And to me, I always think that if you do good breads there, everything else is going to follow suit. Mm-hmm. And it really does, man. But they do everything out of a josper. And for those that know what a josper is, it's a wood burning oven. Now there are gas there, but everything is worked out of the josper or by a grill without the grates. You know, there are saute pans that are actual screens. So he's wilting greens in that to where the fire is actually coming through the screen and licking the greens and wilting it right there. Like everything has this smoky, rich, deep charcoal. Like everything is so wonderful.
Well, what do you think about the scene in general? I mean, what did we get? We got no James Beard Awards again. I mean, what do you think of the overall dining scene here? Is it?
New York is always going to be, special because it's New York City. And I think that for people that are able to make their mark here, or restaurants that are able to really do it here first, can do it anywhere. But I think that coming up with a new great restaurant like Theodora, and there's always one good one every couple of years. But those places, I think, will be special because it's New York. The New York food scene, it's not, to me, it's not that different from something that's happening out in Chicago or something that's happening out in LA, because Theodora can work in those cities too. But what makes it unique is that it's here in New York. It's more namesake than anything else.
Do you think there's anything to the fact that there's so many restaurants here and there's so many options that for a place like Theodora, for a place like Theodora to excel, it has to be excellent? So like the competition here forces you to be just a little bit better than in other markets just because there's so much here, or is that kind of going?
Well, the one thing I think about New York diners in particular, and those who are really into food, not like these influencer follower motherfuckers who just, will drink bleach if you tell them to, but I think that the thing about Theodora and the thing about diners aren't stupid. They're able to see through authenticity. There are several restaurants that are really trying to hit that Michelin star mark, spending top dollar on like really high-end name brand chefs, to keep in your corral to make sure that you're doing everything right. And that's great. And the product is good. But the general public can see through that. They can see what you're trying to do. And when they got to pay that price point, they're going to hold your standard even higher. Like, for one, you got me paying, $400 or $500 per person for this tasting menu, but I already know who's in that back room. You got like 3 heavyweight chefs. So this food damn well better be like fucking fire. You know what I mean? And I think that you kind of set yourself up for unattainable perfection. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, chefs are perfectionists all the way around. Charlie Trotter used to say, always be on the quest for the perfect meal, knowing that he could never reach it. But the strive for that you're always reaching. But I think some of these people are, putting that bar so fucking high that you're only hurting yourself, But then you have places like Theodora where you are doing great food, done by quality chefs at a much lower price in rooms that, You don't need a jacket and, have to wear dress shoes.
Yeah.
But you're getting that quality meal. And you're there and you're wowed because, like, wow, this fucking food and this bread and this atmosphere is jumping. And it's unpretentious and it's great. And I think that a lot of New York diners are smart enough to know the difference.
Yeah. There's kind of like dinner as theater. Where, you want to go in and have that like really elevated experience. That never really does it for me. I appreciate it and I do enjoy really composed things. But like what you were explaining with Teodora or my favorite place is Al Di La, there's a lot of these. There's a lot of these restaurants that I find in New York that, yes, you can go. Look, there are wonderful places all over. I love them. There's a higher concentration of them here just because there's more people here. But I love the I don't know if it's chef driven or what you would consider it, but these smaller places that are less pretentious that just absolutely nail it. And it's comforting because you know that like this week, next week, 2 years from now, you're still going to get that same, tagliatelle bolognese from Al Di La, which is my favorite. And
they've been there for 20 years,
I love that place. It's my favorite. It's like, as a matter of fact, I'm doing an episode there. I absolutely love it. They do a braised rabbit that I think is like my favorite dish in New York City. But man, is there anything we didn't hit on? I kind of want to talk to you about what's next, but...
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's waiting in the wings, and I've been careful not to kind of bring it into the mainstream too soon. I will tell you, I think I even shared this with you on Instagram. There's going to be a Chris Scott action figure coming out.
I love that.
Pretty soon.
Crazy. That's when you know you really made it. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time out, man.
Absolutely. Anytime, bro. Anytime.
Appreciate you. Thank you.